What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Caffeinated Bible Chatter. We're back. This is Kyle O'Shields sitting here with Dylan Brown. And as always, we got this sword out. It's open. It's ready to go. The thing's sharp. We got the coffee out. Coffee's hot. It's ready to go for this what I think will be a pretty cool series coming up. But yeah, Dylan, let them know what's going on, what you're drinking.
Yeah, the coffee is hot, as Kyle said, and the word is sharp, as always. I'm drinking not house blend Starbucks this time, but I'm drinking some Black Rifle, Just Black, JB is what it's called, mixed in with some, my wife got me some, I've always do the 4 Essential Creamer, because we're fighting inflammation. There's no extra junk in that. But it's the caramel kind this time, and I like it. And I still got a dash of honey in there. So it is, it's sipping good. It's sipping hot. And I will say, as a sidebar, this is the first time I've ever podcasted in front of my wife, and she's not very close to me, but she's in the outer room where I can see her. And so,
Oh boy.
If any of our listeners think that I may seem nervous throughout this episode, it's not because we're not used to this, because we are at this point, but I have a little bit of an audience now. So if y'all hear any cussing in the background or anything like that, that's probably she's looked at me. She just looked at me. So I love giving her a hard time. So
be careful what you say tonight.
That's right. And
throwing range.
My 2 daughters are still up for some reason, even though we're not supposed to say when we're recording this. And so I've already told them 3 times and threatened their life to not make a noise. So my oldest, Mags, she actually wants to be she told me the other day, she was like, I want to do a podcast. Not with me, but just a podcast. And she said she wanted to do a little bit of Bible and just her life. So
there you go.
Yeah, we're praying through that. So but I'm ready to roll. This is going to be a good series. It's going to be a good series.
Yeah. Yeah. My kids are still up as well. I'm hoping they don't bust through that door right in the middle of this. We'll see. They're watching a movie back there. So we'll see how this goes. They may, which we can't edit these in the middle of them because I don't know how. So if that happens, we'll just keep rolling.
That's right. And I was thinking about this today. If somebody's looking for the polished podcast, this is probably not for them anyway. And, I think with me anyway, every aspect, I'm going to adjust my computer here. Every aspect of the way I'm wired is unpolished. Like I actually, me and my dad have these conversations all the time. We were having this conversation today. We were talking about it in the context of church, but I can't stand like super polished church services. Now, what I mean is not that, we know that everything should be done, decently and in order. I think is what 1 Corinthians says. And so there's, you should be organized. You shouldn't be a train wreck, stuff like that. But, I don't like professionalism and fakeness. And so we were listening to this one guy preach, and he literally, I'm just getting on a rabbit trail here, Kyle, trying to make this episode longer than it needs to be. And my wife shaking her head. I'm watching you as I say these things. But he was holding his S's. He was like, and he went across the roads.
Oh boy.
And I exaggerated slightly there, but not much. And it made me cringe. And so we're raw and real. Kyle is too, so that's what we're going to do.
Yeah. All right. So last week we actually did an episode with anybody that emailed in or commented on one of the videos if they had questions or something like that. And I think we're going to start doing that every now and then. As we get a few questions, we'll do some listener questions or whatever we titled that episode. But yeah, if you missed that one last week, go check it out. We talked about marriage, divorce, traditional versus contemporary church services. There was a 4th one. I can't remember what it is right now. Drinking. That's right. Yep. So if you missed that one, go check it out. This week we're starting a new series, which I think will be pretty cool. It'll probably be, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. But basically, we're just going to go through the book of Revelation, not verse by verse, but that'll take forever. But basically, just how you break this book down, right? If there's a certain way you need to read this thing, right? If you don't, that's where a lot of false doctrine and things like that come out of this book, and it can just be confusing. There's some crazy things mentioned in the book of Revelation, and it can get crazy, it can get weird. But like we always say, we take this thing literal until you can't, right? Until it says to take it otherwise. So I don't know how you wanted to start. I guess, do you want me to go ahead and read Revelation 1:19, or do you want to?
Well, we'll kind of get some. I was going to give these 3 views typically of the book of Revelation. Like Kyle said, I do think this will be extremely applicable and helpful if somebody's interested and doesn't already know the things we're going to lay out in this episode. And of course, me and Kyle are certainly not geniuses. We, learn from people, and then we just, seek to pass on the information to anybody that's crazy as we are that will believe these things. And so we've learned these things from other people, and it's been a great resource. And it does simplify the book of Revelation because I actually hear it all the time. Like, what are you interested in learning? Well, I'd like to really study the book of Revelation. It's very popular for people to say that. And like, I'll be honest, I've heard people say that, and I know this is going to sound mean. I really don't mean it to be mean, but I know the kind of church they go to, and they're like, yeah, we're studying the book of Revelation. And I'm always like, because I know there's a good chance that they don't break the book of Revelation down the way that we believe it's supposed to be broken down. And that's going to make things very complicated. And it's going to seem like, especially from Revelation chapter 6 through chapter 19, it's going to seem like 100 different things happen, and you can't make heads or tails of when it happens or what that means or whatever. And so I think we're going to simplify that and then try to take, there's 3 sections of the book of Revelation, try to take each section and do a week or 2, depending on how long we need on that section. So I think it'll be applicable, and just hang on with us as we do it. So there's 3 views that people typically have when they look at the book of Revelation. And what I mean by people is like most Bible students, scholars, people that, dive into this. Some of these people I would question how deeply they dive into it because they have crazy views on it. But there's really 3, excuse me, and I got a little cough, and I'll probably do that a few times. But there's 3 interpretations connected with the book of Revelation. There's the futurist, and that's the correct view. That's what we are. And what that says is the book of Revelation is telling us of things that is coming down the road, prophecy. Okay, there's the preterist, and I think this is growing. It's been a thing, but I think it's growing, and it's growing because of, I think a lot of Calvinists are preterists, and go figure. Because this is the incorrect view, and go figure, Calvinists always find a way to get as far from the truth as they can. I don't know why they pride themselves on that, but it's the incorrect view in the preterists, and we'll break down what these are. And then the third one is the historical view, and this is half correct. So what do we mean by those? Well, the future, excuse me, the futuristic view is somebody that would come to a premillennial belief. Okay, and that's what we are, which simply means that we believe that Jesus Christ has to come back before the millennial reign. Now, you go to the Old Testament, you see all these promises of the millennium, and that Christ will be ruling and reigning, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and all these things. And I don't know how people can say, oh, well, the kingdom comes without Christ returning, because you do away with all those promises that we see in the Old Testament. Now, how is it that those people do that? Well, it's because they don't take the Bible literally. They spiritualize and take an allegorical approach, and they say, well, what that really means is, it's a hidden gem here. It's not really saying what it's saying. It's, means this. It's code or whatever. and go back and listen to our early episodes when we talk about allegorical versus literal approach. But we take the Bible literally until we can't, like Kyle's already said. So that is, we're premillennial. We believe these things in Revelation outside the first, 3 chapters. We believe that these are things that have yet to happen. Okay. And so it talks about the theme of Revelation is really Christ returning. And so we believe that is a future event that is actually going to happen. Okay. So that's the that is the future view, the futurist view. The historical view, the one that is half right, in our opinion, this is a little bit better, obviously, than the preterist view, because we believe the preterist view is completely inaccurate. But this is viewing the book of Revelation is believing that although the book prophecies events in the future, that most of the prophecies between Revelation 4 and 19 have already been fulfilled in European and American history through to the 19th century. Okay, so they would believe that a lot of the things you find in the book of Revelation have happened throughout history after John penned these in AD 95 or so. They believe that it happened after that, but it's already happened throughout history before our time frame that we're living and breathing right now. Okay, the reason that's half view, not to get ahead of ourselves, is because some of these churches that we're going to find in the book of Revelation, they were churches that actually were around in AD 95. Okay, and then you have the preterist system viewpoint, and that teaches that these events described in Revelation were fulfilled before the book was written. So they're looking at the book of Revelation as something from the past. The preterist believes that the Antichrist was Nero, and the second coming was the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. And so every preterist is pretty much amillennial. And so again, what is an amillennialist? Well, we're premillennialists, meaning we believe Christ has to come back before the millennium, literally come back to this earth before the millennium sets up, because he's going to rule and reign as the king over his kingdom. Okay, well, an amillennialist, just means that there's not one, so they don't believe there is a millennium. Again, how do they do that? How do they come to that conclusion? Well, they spiritualize the heck out of the Bible, and that always leads to trouble. So, and what that preterist view typically leads to is the way Catholics view the book of Revelation, and that is they hardly take any of the book of Revelation literally. They spiritualize the whole thing, and it would be no shock that they spiritualize the whole book of Revelation, because Revelation 17, which talks about the great whore, is the Catholic system. It is Roman Catholicism. And so they no doubt Satan working in that counterfeit religion, trying to cover his basis and to not let, he doesn't want that to expose the counterfeit system that he set up in Catholicism. So it runs hand in hand with that. So that's just a good viewpoint to kind of show you, what's out there and what people think. And Kyle, I can still hear the music just slightly. I will be honest. That's okay. I think you went longer last time. Maybe. It was pretty low. Yeah, it was just faint. That's why I didn't hear it until I slowed down. But yeah, that's some major viewpoints. And so, again, everyone is pretty much premillennial, postmillennial. Some people believe that the Christ kingdom will be set up on this earth, and then Christ comes back. And that's why people try to usher in the kingdom. Like they're going to do good things and try to find world peace, bring in world peace without the king coming back. And then he comes. That's garbage, because he's the Prince of Peace. But we're premillennialists, and we believe that Christ must come back, and then his kingdom sets up. So I guess, Kyle, if you want to lay out those key verses, we believe there's 2 key verses in the book of Revelation. So go ahead and tackle that, Big Cow.
You want me to read Revelation 1:19? Or
I would maybe do, you want to start with verse 10?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. All right.
Revelation 1:10. Revelation 1:10. It says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. So John is in the Spirit. He's telling you that right here at the beginning. And then you get to Revelation chapter 1, verse 19, just a few verses down, and he tells you, write the things which thou hast seen, and the things which are, and the things which shall be hereafter. And that verse right there basically is your outline for the book of Revelation. It tells you how to look at this thing. So understanding that Paul is in the Spirit, right, at this time, basically when you read verse 19, you're reading it as if he's teleported right to the future. He's in the moment when he's reading this, the things which thou hast seen would be where we are now, the church age, right? He's writing about the church and things like that. The things which are, so he is in this moment seeing, this tribulation stuff that we're going to go through in this book. So the things which are is the things he's seeing right there at that moment. He's in the Spirit. And then the things which shall be hereafter is going into eternity and stuff. So I guess breaking down that verse, chapters 1 through 3 would be what thou hast seen. Chapters 4 through 19 would be the things which are. And then the things which shall be hereafter would be chapters 20 through 22. So that basically tells you right there in one verse how to read it.
Yeah. I think it's, like we said earlier, the theme of this book is Christ. I mean, the theme of the whole Bible is the second coming or the millennium. And so the theme of this is Christ coming back, book of Revelation. And so, that the things which are Revelation 6 through 19, that is John, laying out what he's seeing from the perspective of Christ coming back and the things that surround that. So that the time frame that precedes Christ, coming back, the short time frame, and then the things that happen right after Christ is coming back, before he sets up his millennial kingdom. So let's go back to Revelation 1:10, Big Kai, and just lay that out. So the Revelation 1:19, I think will be pretty simple for everybody to understand. That is a key verse, and if you write in your Bible, which you should, you should circle that verse, underline it. But again, it says, write the things which thou hast seen, the things which are, so past and present, and the things which shall be hereafter, obviously future, which should not shock us because this book is literally called, we always say Revelation, which is fine, but the book is called the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And Revelation 1:8 says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and ending, saith the Lord, which is, which was, and which is to come. And so Jesus Christ, he is, he is, of course, omnipresent. He's always been, he always will be. And so, this book is a revelation of him. It's Christ giving his revelation to the Apostle John. And so he breaks it down just like he is, in that three-part deal. But I want to go back to Revelation 1:10 because the Revelation 1:19 is pretty understandable, I think, for somebody that maybe has never heard any of this. And so, again, that breakdown for the book is we see Revelation 1 through 3. Now, Kyle, I was listening, but is this the same way you broke it down? Revelation 1 through 3, church age. Revelation 4 through 19.
Yeah.
Well, did you say Revelation 1 through 4? How'd you
I said 1
out?
through 3, just because chapter 4, verse 1, John's raptured out,
right?
Showing the rapture.
Right. Okay. And then technically, so this is how we see the book of Revelation. So like Kyle said, Revelation 1 through 3 is literally the church age that we're in and at the end of right now, in the last 2,000 years. Revelation chapter 4 is, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we're eventually going to get these passages, but Revelation chapter 4 is pictures the rapture, shows the rapture. And again, I don't want to say too much about that, but John is called up. Here's the sound of a trump. All of those things is exactly as the rapture will be. And then Revelation chapter 5, really the tribulational things actually haven't started yet because it's just talking about the things that will be happening around the throne. Right. Really Revelation 4 and chapter 5 are. And then starting in Revelation chapter 6 through 19 is the accounts of things going on in the tribulation. And then obviously 20 through 22 is after the tribulation, and it's after the second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
So Revelation 1:19 is not necessarily complicated. You see that things which thou hast seen, that's past. Okay, that's what we're in today. John's looking at it from a futuristic standpoint. The things which are, that's him looking at it through his futuristic standpoint. And the things which shall be, and that is him looking at things that haven't even come, even though he's in a futuristic standpoint, which is the millennium, New Jerusalem, all those things. So I do want to go back to Revelation 1:10, Big Kai, because Revelation 1:19 is pretty simple, even though a lot of people probably have not heard that. But Revelation 1:10 would be because what somebody could say is, okay, well, I get what you're saying out of Revelation 1:19, but how do we actually know that John's vantage point was proceeding right before the second coming of Christ? Okay. Well, again, Revelation 1:10, Big Kai, you read it earlier, but if you want to go ahead and read that again.
Yeah, Revelation 1:10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet.
Yeah, so the reason I go back to that is because a lot of people think that if they're just reading casually, and again, we like reading the Bible, but we also, we want to study the Bible, and so we got to figure out what is the Lord's day. Well, me and Kyle breeze through that because we know what that is. But somebody may actually think, oh, well, that's, maybe Sunday, because, the very popular expression, at least in the South, is, on Saturday night, you'll see it across Facebook, get up, tomorrow's the Lord's day. And I get what they mean by that. It's fine. But in the Bible, you don't see it called that. It's not that. It should be, you should go worship the Lord on the first day of the week. It's what's laid out after the resurrection of Christ. But that's not what the Bible means there. And the reason that we know that is because the Lord's day is the same thing as the day of the Lord, as Kyle said earlier. It is the day of the Lord, and you can run those references in your own Bible concordance, but it's the theme of the Bible. And the day of the Lord, what is that? Well, that is when Christ is returning, physically, literally, at the second coming. Okay, so John's looking at it from that vantage point. But a cool verse, I think, a couple passages I think we could go to solidify that and show you that is, Kyle, if you want to go to John 21, verse 20 through 23.
Yep.
And I'm going to go to Ezekiel 37:1. So what Kyle said earlier is that, John was catapulted. He hit a time warp and went ahead in time is what we're saying. And that is most certainly what's happening here. But you notice the phrase, he says, I was in the Spirit, capital S there. But the reality is, okay, well, if we're born again believers right here, right now, we're in the Spirit 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because we're sealed by the Spirit. And we, go back and listen to some old episodes when we talk about that and eternal security and all that. But we're in the Spirit. The Spirit is inside of us all the time. Okay. So a good cross reference to break that down of what he's specifically talking about here. He's not specifically talking about the Holy Spirit indwelling him, and certainly not talking about the Holy Spirit indwelling him on a Sunday to go to church or something like that. But he, as Kyle said, he's catapulted to the future. So that the same thing actually happens because God is multidimensional and time is nothing to him. He does the same thing with Ezekiel. In the chapter where he talks about Ezekiel's dry bones, Ezekiel 37, in the very first verse of Ezekiel 37, it says, the hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the Spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of dry bones. So notice, he's in the Spirit of the Lord, and God is taking him somewhere in the valley, which was full of dry bones. So he's moving his location, but here Ezekiel, he's also moving his time. He's literally putting Ezekiel as, like we would call it, watching movies growing up through a time machine. Yeah. Because the context of Ezekiel 37 is actually the second coming of Christ as well. And it's things that have to do with Israel and all of that. I won't have time to tackle that. But so I want you to notice the phraseology is very similar. Again, he says, he carried me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of dry bones. And then again, Revelation 1:10, I was in the spirit on the Lord's day. Okay. And then you cross-reference that with Revelation 1:19. It gives you those three things that he's now seeing from a new time. So, and then another cool reference, Kyle, if you have that John 21 reference, I think that'd be cool to hit too. Yeah. You want to read verse 20 through verse 23.
Yeah, then Peter, turning about, seeth the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper, and said, Lord, which is he that betrayeth thee? Talking about John, by the way, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Verse 21, Peter, seeing him, saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? Verse 22, Jesus saith unto him, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Verse 23, then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, he shall not die, but if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee?
Okay. And so interesting little cross-reference here because, this is right after Jesus and Peter having a conversation in John 21, and it's where, Peter has denied Christ. He's out fishing. Jesus comes on the beach there, the shore. Him and Peter are talking. He says, do you love me? He asks him that 3 times. He tells him to feed his sheep, tells him to feed his lambs, stuff like that. Okay. And then you have, as Cal started in verse 20, Peter's looking and noticing John near them. And this is not the only passage that they start kind of competing and comparing themselves to another person. They do that in other passages too. You have the one passage that's interesting where James and John's mom comes and they're like, and she's like, hey, can they sit on the right hand and the left hand of the Father? I think that's the phrase that she uses, something like that. That's the ESV version. But they're always doing this. And so Peter, as you heard in the text that you read, Peter, is looking, and he literally says, it's called the disciple whom Jesus loved, the same one that was on Christ's breast at supper. That's obviously John. John always referred to himself as that. And he said, or verse 21, Peter seeing him saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? So Jesus is going through this restoration conversation with Peter. And he's just come off the heels of telling him, hey, this is what I want you to do, Peter. I'm still going to use you. This is what I want you to do. And then he tells him in verse 18 and verse 19 how Peter was going to die. And then Peter sees John, and Peter's like, what's that guy going to do for you? Like, he's like, okay, now that I know what's going on with me, what about this joker? And this rumor gets started because of them misunderstanding what Jesus is saying, that John would never die. And that certainly is not the case. John did die. But was it verse 22, interestingly enough, it says, Jesus saith unto him, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. And so in other words, it kind of gives us, even back in John 21, it gives us a little bit of and it shows why the disciples got confused, because it gives us a little bit of a foreshadowing of really what Jesus was talking about. And what he was talking about was that John would actually see these things before he dies, because he did, because he was catapulted ahead to the day of the Lord and was able to see all of these things, in an amazing way. And so did John eventually die? Yeah, he eventually died. He's the only disciple that died of natural causes, or, not as a normal death. He did get thrown into I think history says, a boiling hot water, but he still survived. And then they sent him to the Isle of Patmos where all this happened. And so that's kind of cool. And so it shows you that there's just Ezekiel 37:1, important cross-reference to Revelation 1:10, and then that reference showing you that there is some connection that before Revelation even got here, Jesus was making headway, showing us that John was going to see some things in regards to Christ coming, his second coming, and he certainly did. So thought that was interesting to maybe kind of prove that foundational verse there of Revelation 1:10. So those are the two key verses. So, well, Big Kai, anything? So I guess we can lay out, like I said, that's really the key that you have to understand when looking at the book of Revelation again. Remember that Revelation 1-3, church age. Revelation 4-19, judgment seat of Christ / tribulation. Because remember, if you've listened to us back with the end time stuff a long time ago, those are happening at the same time. Those that are saved, church, will be up in heaven at the judgment seat of Christ, and then the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then at the same time, those that are lost will be down here on earth going through the tribulation. And so specifically, chapter 4 and chapter 5 breaks down what's going on in heaven. And at the same time, chapter 6-19 breaks down what's going on in the tribulation down on earth. So, Kyle, maybe we could just lay out these 7 churches that show up in Revelation 1-3, or show up in really chapter 2 and chapter 3, because chapter 1 just kind of gives those key verses and some overview of the book of Revelation as we've already hit. Those 2 key verses being verse 10 and verse 19 of Revelation 1. But then in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, you have these 7 churches. And so I'll say this, Mikal, and then I'll let you, if you have those out in front of you, I'll let you kind of run away with some of them. Do you have on your stuff the kind of like what the time frame of those churches,
I used to have it. I don't
know.
No,
okay. That's okay. I got it right here.
Okay.
So those 7 churches, there's 7 churches that show up in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. Now again, we got to remember this, not just in the book of Revelation, but in all of the Bible, there's 3 layers of application. There is historical application, which is what was literally going on when the writing was being done. There's devotional application, which is how it applies, in our time frame. And then there's the doctrinal application, which is what does it say to us in a prophecy manner. So the same thing is true with these 7 churches that show up in the book of Revelation. Okay, so those 7 churches are Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And you probably heard us say the word Laodicea a lot in this podcast, even if you haven't listened very long. So from a historical standpoint, when John was getting this revelation, and this was pinned down in AD 95. Okay, those were 7 real churches on this planet in AD 95-ish. Okay, 7 real churches. That's the historical application. And he says some things to those 7 churches. And there's in all those churches, he tells them some things about how they're doing. He tells them some challenges that they're encountering, and then he tells them some things that they can do to overcome. And all 7 of them. Okay, well, that certainly applied to those churches literally in AD 95. Okay, but so that's the historical application. But what about the devotional application? Well, the devotional is that we believe very clearly laid out here in these 7 churches is the time period of the 2,000-year parentheses of the church age. So in other words, we believe the church of Ephesus represents a time period, a window, a small window of the whole window of the church age. Okay, so we believe all 7 of those do that. And I'm going to come back to what we believe those are. And then doctrinally, and this is talked about probably the least, doctrinally, future tense, these churches are also going to represent literal churches in the tribulation. And that's why you're going to see some tribulational type context, like some of these churches are told to overcome, and if they overcome, they'll have access to the tree of life. And if they overcome, their name won't be blotted out of the book of life. Well, we don't have to worry about that now because we're eternally secure. But in the tribulation, remember Matthew 24:13 says that if you endure to the end, the same shall be saved. So 3 layers of application going on here. And see, that's not just a book of, that's not just a book of Revelation thing. That's a Bible thing. So the Bible is really 3 times as thick as we have. So let's lay out because really what I think the coolest aspect of this and what we glean the most from is the devotional truth, which is how does this, all 7 of these churches we can take application from. But when it comes to the window in which they represent in church history, it certainly applies to us and gives us some understanding of some things. So the first church, again, is the church of Ephesus. Okay, this represents, we believe, 90 AD to 200 AD. Okay, and this church is what they represent is fully purposed. Okay, it's what Ephesus really means, fully purposed. Okay, and we're not going to really go into dissecting too much of what he says to each church, but you can do that studying on your own. But we're just kind of giving you some overview because, again, we're not necessarily going verse by verse. Okay, the second church is Smyrna. Smyrna represents 200 AD, so right where the cutoff of Ephesus was. There's a transition there. 200 AD to 325 AD. Okay, and they represent bitterness or death. Now, again, if you're a historian at all, you can kind of go and look at these things and the things that Christ is saying to these churches and what these churches mean or represent, and then compare it with history and how it lines up and the things that happened in the church in church history during these windows that we're giving for each church. All right. So Smyrna, again, 200 AD to 325, and it's bitterness or death. Okay, the third church is Pergamos. Pergamos represents 325 AD to 500 AD. And they represent much marriage. Much marriage. Again, go study out more there for yourself. The fourth one is Thyatira. Thyatira, and that is they time frame pictures in the church age 500 AD to 1000 AD, and they represent their time period represents odor of affliction. Terrible deal there. Terrible deal. All right. Then you get to chapter 3. So that's all the ones in chapter 4. And I do think this is interesting and worth saying. In chapter 2, you have 4 churches. And then in chapter 3, you have 3 churches. And that's the way God always works, is he works in sevens. There's no accident that there's 7 churches mentioned here. He works in sevens, but he always works in 4, then 3. It's never 5, then 2, or 6, then 1, or 2, then 5. He works in a category of 4. Then he works in a category of 3. And you'd say, well, Dylan, that's dumb that you're laying that out just based on the chapters. Well, I think that's just a little extra cool nugget that our King James Bible does. And again, if you don't, believe the King James Bible is perfect, then you don't have any interest in that anyway, and that's fine. That's fine. But this is the way God works. One example of him always working in 4 then 3 is Christ came to this. There was 4,000 years, give or take, in the Old Testament. And again, it's not down to the day. It's around 4,000 years of Old Testament history from Adam to Christ coming on his first coming. About 4,000 years. Okay. And then there's going to be 3,000. There's 3,000 years after that. There's 3,000 years of history from Christ coming to the end of the millennium. Now, what is the first 2,000 years? Okay, well, it's the church age. Well, Christ is here, of course, for 33 and a half years. He dies. He's buried. He resurrects. He sends back to the Father. Boom, church age is coming in. Okay, there's 2,000 years. And then the last 1,000 years, what is that? That's the millennium. So God always works like that. He works in 4, and then he works in 3s, because in total he works in 7s. And if that's complicated, don't worry about it. That's just a little extra tidbit. But it brings us to the 5th church, which is Sardis. Sardis represents 1000 AD to 1500 AD, and they mean the red ones. The red ones. Okay. The 6th church, and these last 2 are much more popular because we talk about them the most. But the sixth church is the Church of Philadelphia. And the Church of Philadelphia, we believe, represents 1500 AD to 1900 AD, or the end of the 1800s. Okay, and Philadelphia means brotherly love. So I will say this, if you go study these 7 churches, this is the only church that actually doesn't have anything negative said about it. Nothing negative said. And again, if you were to look back at that and you were to compare, and it's interesting, this church is told that they kept his word. And we believe it's 1500 to 1900, and it just so happens that the King James Bible came out in the 1600s. Again, do with that what you will. And so Philadelphia, the Church of Philadelphia has nothing negative said about it. And they're the church of an open door. And you think about history, how God used the church from 1500 to 1900. I can list a few things off the top of my head that was majorly impacted the world for the cause of Christ. Okay, you have Martin Luther in the 1500s with the 95 Theses, and which started the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, seeing the issues with the Catholic Church, he turns on the Catholic Church. Okay, it brings on this big Reformation. In the 1600s, the King James Bible comes out. People have in their language, English being the dominant language of the world it is today, people have in their language the words of God. That brings light. Where words come, light comes. And it's no coincidence that right before this time period, we also call those times that came before this the Dark Ages. Why would they be the Dark Ages? Well, because without God's words, there's an issue, there's an absence of light. Now, somebody would say, well, Dylan, that means you believe that God's word wasn't around until the King James Bible. No, there was still God's word. But the Catholic Church was suppressing God's word and did not want it in the hands of the common people. And so that's where you have people like Gutenberg who come along. I think it was Gutenberg who invented the printing press. And that began to start rolling things in because he said, then Tyndale comes, and Tyndale said, I want the common plowboy to know the word of God just like the Pope. Because why would that be? Well, because the Pope was withholding truth. Why would they do that? Well, because the Catholic Church makes a lot of money. And, when money's the motive, there's always problems. So, Philadelphian Church, what happened in that age? Well, the 95 Theses. The Word of God comes in English. The greatest missionaries and probably preachers that ever lived were in that time frame. You have people like William Carey. The start of the modern missions movement happened in this window. Hudson Taylor, great missionary. Preachers such as Charles Spurgeon, D.L. Moody, George Whitefield, all these guys. Okay, we could go on and on. But that window was a time where God worked mightily, and it's the only time frame where he doesn't say anything negative about them. Okay, and then the seventh church is Laodicea. Laodicea represents 1900 AD, starting to get pretty close to home, until the rapture, because it is the last church mentioned, and then all the way through the end of the chapter, verse 22, still talking to the church of Laodicea, and then Revelation 4:1 is when John is raptured up. Okay, and I don't want to say too much about that because we'll get there once, next episode. But just in reverse of the Church of Philadelphia, just like the Philadelphia, nothing bad was said about it. Well, the reverse is true about Laodicea. Nothing good is said about the Church of Laodicea. And it's the church that is lukewarm, and that would describe exactly what the time frame that you and I live in. It's a lukewarm time. People half in, people half out. It's a church that he says that we think we're rich, but we don't realize we're naked and poor and miserable. We're blind. We don't realize those things. And the reason that would be is because we're in a time frame where, for the most part, across the world, people have things. It's an economically decent time now. I'm not getting into politics, and Joe Biden has suppressed that a little. Yes, granted, maybe because the rapture's coming soon. I don't know, but people have what they need to have in these days. People don't go without very much. but yet we're actually poor because we don't have we're not given to the truth and walking in the truth that the Lord's given us. And so an interesting verse to say there in the context of Revelation, and this would apply to us directly, is he says in Revelation 3:20, he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." And this is key. "If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and I will sup with him and he with me." Why is that a big deal? Well, he's talking to people that already know him. So this is not directly giving a reference to salvation, to opening the door of your heart to Christ for salvation. You can apply that and that's fine. But that's not the context. The context is he's talking to a church, to a group of believers. Okay. But he says that he's on the outside trying to get inside. And so most of what happens in the name of Christianity today is with Christ on the outside. Wrong motives, wrong teaching, false doctrine, whatever it may be. Christ is on the outside, but he says, "I stand at the door and knock, and if any man will hear my voice." So what that lets us know is there is not going to be this massive revival of droves and droves of people coming in and getting right with the Lord. I'm talking worldwide. Nothing massive, nothing like the Great Awakening, which, by the way, the first one happened in the Philadelphian. That's another thing that happened in the Philadelphian time period, was the Great Awakening. Nothing like that is going to happen in the church, in the Laodicean period that we're in. No, there's nothing that shows that. But there can be individuals. That's why it specifies a man there. There can be a small remnant. There can be individuals across this world, across this nation that say, you know what? Though everyone else is heading this direction, man, I'm going to give my life to eternal things. I'm going to allow Christ into every aspect and part of my life and be totally surrendered to him, because the rapture's near. I want to glorify the Lord. So I always find that interesting and think that's extremely applicable. So those are just things that would you can take with you, and again, study those things out for yourself. That are extremely, are extremely applicable and will make sense to how you break down Revelation chapter 1 started through chapter 3.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I think what you were saying right there at the end about knocking and any man hear my voice, that should just be a challenge to us to live every day in view of that judgment seat.
Yeah.
Because right after this, which we'll get into in next episode, right after these 3 chapters, the church isn't mentioned anymore, right? Yeah. John in verse 1 of the next chapter, it's a picture of the church being raptured, and what's the first thing he sees? A throne, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That judgment seat. That's the very next thing on our calendar, that judgment seat. So
yeah,
this
absolutely.
What you ended right there with should definitely be a challenge to us. Live every day like that is the next thing on your calendar, because it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I guess that's first 3 chapters, just laying out the church age. And then when we come back, we will, I guess, I don't know how quick you want to go through this, but I mean, I guess 4 through 19, or that's a
you could do 4 through 19 because technically, like we said earlier, we break this down into 3 components. What we may do, and I don't know, me and Kyle will talk about it. We could do chapter 4 and chapter 5 separate together, because there's 2. It's sort of like because what's going on in heaven with believers and what's going on down on the earth with lost people is happening at the same time. So it's sort of like when you were growing up, when I was growing up watching the Disney Channel, and there would be there would be Sweet Life of Zach and Cody. Okay, here's an example. Zach is over here doing one thing, and then Cody's over here doing another. Well, what they constantly are doing is panning half the episode. They're panning to this guy doing this thing, and then half the episode they're panning over to someone else doing another thing. But they're happening at the same time. Well, that's really what's going on with chapter 4 through 19. Is they're happening at the same time. Chapter 4 and 5 is breaking down what's going on around the throne, and then 6 through 19 is breaking down what's going on down on earth. So maybe we'll break that down into 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So
all right. Well, this would be a good one, I think. Revelation's always something cool to look at, all the end time stuff, the future stuff. But no, I think this will be a good one. Stay tuned in, and we will see y'all on the next one.